This is from Italy's Institute of Crystallography of the National Research Council. Scientists have just conducted a study on the Shroud of Turin. For those of you who don't know what the Shroud of Turin is, the Shroud of Turin is the purported burial cloth of our Lord, of Jesus. And the burial cloth appeared for the first time in public around the 14th century. So skeptics have said for a long time, this is a medieval forgery. This is not really from antiquity. This is not really the cloth that Christ was wrapped in after he was taken down from the cross. You read in the Bible that Joseph of Arimathea, who had this big tomb, wrapped Jesus in this cloth, and he was buried and entombed. And then he's resurrected. So skeptics don't know how to explain this shroud. What's odd about the shroud, though, is there is this faint image of a man on there, but it doesn't appear to be paint. There does appear to be maybe a little bit of blood, but it's not all blood. What's even stranger is the image that's on the shroud appears to be a photographic negative of the image of a man somewhere between 5'7" and 6 feet tall, a man who appears to have been tortured, a man who appears to have a crown of thorns on his head, a man who appears to have been crucified. But it's a photographic negative, as if it were produced by a spurt of light rather than paints or anything like that. And no one's known what this is. If it is, I mean, as it is, something akin to a photographic negative, no one can really understand how that would have appeared, even if it were a medieval forgery from the 14th century. Well, we didn't have photography back then. What is this thing? So in the 1980s, there was a study that used radiocarbon dating to test when the shroud was made. And in the 1980s, scientists concluded, it's from the Middle Ages. So it can't be the burial cloth of Christ because it's not from antiquity. This is a medieval forgery. And that's what most people know about the Shroud of Turin, if they know anything at all. However, there were always some questions about those studies. What part of the shroud were they testing? Was there any contamination, or was the radiocarbon dating precise? Well, now there's a new study that appears to be a little bit more precise. The study measured the natural aging of flax cellulose in the shroud and converted it to time since manufacture. So it studied 8 small samples of the fabric of the Shroud of Turin, put them under an X-ray, uncovered little details about the linens and the cellulose's structure and patterns, because the cellulose is made up of sugar molecules that break down over time. So you can reverse engineer this and figure out how old the garment is. And the study discovered that the shroud, the material of the shroud, has measurements that are analogous with samples whose dating, according to historical records, goes back to the 1st century. It's analogous to samples that they have from 55 to 74 AD. So almost precisely at the crucifixion. Now, the team also compared the Shroud of Turin with linen samples from the Middle Ages, from the 13th and 14th century, when, according to the 1988 study, the shroud was supposedly forged. However, the samples didn't match. They were totally different. So it couldn't have been from the 13th or 14th century. It has to have been from the 1st century. It has to have been, well, pretty much from exactly the moment that our Lord was crucified. So why was the 1988 study wrong? Well, according to lead author of this study, Dr. Liberato De Caro, he said that the fabric samples are usually subject to all kinds of contamination, which cannot be completely removed from the dated specimen. So, for instance, if the cleaning procedure of the sample is not thoroughly performed, the carbon-14 dating is not reliable. So the numbers are this is just a much more precise mode of dating. And it turns out from the latest scientific study, the Shroud of Turin appears to be the sort of shroud that could have been the shroud of Jesus. Right now, go to hallow.com/Knowles. The Hallow app offers an incredible range of guided meditations and prayers that are designed to help you deepen your spirituality and strengthen your connection to God. With Hallow, you can embark on a journey of exploration, diving into different themes and types of prayer and meditation. For the 3rd year in a row, Hallow is having their wildly popular Saints in 7 Days Prayer Challenge, where over the course of 4 weeks, you will journey through the life of an incredible saint, learning more about that saint's faith, that saint's story, and that saint's ultimate surrender to the will of God in his or her life. The challenge will kick off August 5th. Saints in 7 days goes deep into the lesser-known parts of a saint's life to show that while their journeys to sainthood were filled with God's grace and glory, they also included human struggles, great suffering, mistakes, and a profound need for God's mercy. Download the app for free. Join the challenge at hallow.com/Knowles. Hallow.com/Knowles, Knowles, for an exclusive 3-month free trial of all 10,000 plus prayers and meditations. That is hallow.com/Knowles. I mention this whole story because I really like the Shroud of Turin, but because this is really scandalous for people. If you talk to a normie on the street, some agnostic, some atheist, you say, hey, what do you think about the Shroud of Turin, which is the image of which is totally inexplicable from contemporary technological advancements, at the time that it was seems to have been made, and which dates back to antiquity and which purports to be the burial shroud of Christ. They would laugh at you. They'd say, oh, that's ridiculous. It was just made up. Whenever it first appeared on the public scene, it was just made up. It's all fake. These relics, they're all fake. The whole thing, it's all just like total nonsense, superstition, legends. But then you show them this study. You say, no, it's from antiquity. Whatever it is, it's from antiquity. And the image is a photographic negative. And we don't, how do you explain it? That's scandalous to people. It's scandalous even to some religious people. There are some people who would call themselves Christians who would say, oh, I don't believe in that Shroud of Turin. That's crazy. I don't believe in something like the tilma of Our Lady of Guadalupe. This was a Marian apparition in America. This was a miraculous image, appeared on a cloth that was worn by a peasant 500 years ago. This cloth should have broken down within 30, 40 years. It's still intact. Anarchists in the early 20th century tried to blow this thing up. They blew up the church. They didn't destroy this delicate shroud. In fact, there was a crucifix that was bent around it as if to protect it. The image that miraculously appeared, no one really knows what the image is made of. And there was a microscopic analysis done on the eyes. So it's this image of Our Lady. It's this image of Mary. And it's an image, the microscopic study looked in at the lens of the eye in the image and found out that the lens of the eye contours exactly as a human eye. And there's actually an image in the lens of the eye, which is the reflection of the room, apparently, when the shroud was when the tilma was shown. Things like the Shroud of Turin, things like the tilma of Our Lady of Guadalupe are really scandalous to people, and even to religious people, because they say, no, religion's an abstract thing. It's not about this cloth. It's not about this thing that happened at this date. It reminds me of 1 Corinthians. It says, for both the Jews require signs, and the Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, unto the Jews indeed a stumbling block, and unto the Gentiles foolishness, but unto them that are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. When you read a study like this and you say, oh, wow, this actually might be the miraculous burial shroud of Christ. In fact, that seems to be the most logical conclusion of what this is. Or the tilma, this might seems to just be a miraculous image, because no one else can really explain it any other way. That seems to be the simplest explanation for it and the most persuasive. Then you start to think, oh, yikes, it might all be true. The claims that God makes in the Bible, the claims that the church makes, the guidelines that God has set down and that the church promotes. Do this, don't do this. God saying, I want to be worshiped in this way and you ought to live in this way. Golly, that might all be true. That is scandalous to people. That's scary to some people. That religion might not just be something floating around in your head, a matter of personal preference. There might be a right answer, and there might be a right way for you to live. And you might be called upon to use your reason, which is a distinguishing feature that reveals us to be made in the image and likeness of God. You might be required to use your reason to open your heart to faith and revelation and live in the right way so that you can know your God and you can flourish. And you might actually be convinced of that or brought along the path to being convinced of that by things like a really old shroud. Yikes, maybe it's all real. That was a great clip. Now hold up, ring the bell, subscribe to the Michael Knowles YouTube channel. We'll see you next time.